Our presenters today are Jason Adolf, Industry Vice President of Public Sector with Appian, and June Burr, Business Process Program Manager with the Vermont Agency of Transportation. With that, I'd like to now turn things over to Jason to get things started.
Thanks, Jim. I appreciate it, and certainly appreciate everybody joining us today. So today what we're going to talk about is a couple of things. I'll go here to an agenda slide. So we're going to be talking about how enterprise low-code and case management can be applicable to some of the challenges that we see in our state and local government markets. And we're really privileged to have June Burr here from the state of Vermont. She's going to go through a use case that they've done over the last couple of years with our product and talk about their experience, talk about her experience and some of the metrics around the program that she's responsible for. So as we go through this, feel free to queue up some questions in the chat, and we'll be happy to take a couple of questions at the end of the presentation. I think we're targeting about 45 minutes for this discussion, and certainly if people have questions, we can stay on a little bit longer at the end. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So what we tend to see across our customers is a number of things. And so just by way of background, I've been with Appian about 2.5 years. I was Appian's customer for 8 years prior as a systems integrator on the federal side. So I've done a number of implementations. I've run a BPM practice for a number of large systems integrators. So, you know, I've seen a lot of these challenges that we see in the marketplace. And frankly, some of them, most of them are applicable to both the end customer, meaning that the state and local agency, and are a lot of the integrators that deliver services to those organizations. And so there's a few things that I'll point out. The first being the agility required to deal with policy and regulatory changes in the public sector market. You know, for those of you who have been doing this for a while, not just at the state and local level, but clearly at the national level here in the States, the volatility in public sector policies, it has gone to levels I've just never seen in my career, certainly. And being able to adapt to those changes without it costing a fortune to modify the systems that support those agencies that have to enforce those policies has clearly become an area where I think customers are looking for alternative solutions to the ways they may have done things in the past. Another thing that we see clearly is this trying to find talent in the marketplace. And what we see here is pretty consistent across all of our public sector customers. The first being, you know, one, it's just hard to find good tech talent. Two, a lot of the systems that our public sector customers are maintaining are becoming ancient by today's standards. And frankly, the folks that are coming out of college into these tech jobs don't want to do COBOL programming. They don't want to do C#. And so they're looking for what are the hot skills to be able to do going forward. And frankly, the other thing is, just from a budgetary perspective, it's expensive to have very large IT programs staffed by hundreds and hundreds of developers. Another challenge that we see, frankly, is a lack of ability to integrate across multiple systems. And what's happened is, and you'll hear me preach this to our customers over and over again, but you know, in the early 2000s and mid 2000s, there were a lot of great point solutions that came out as, you know, web-based applications. And for a lot of government organizations, they went and bought one of everything. They went and bought all of them. And so now what's happened is you've got all of these investments that have been made by customers that, you know, have significant maintenance tails, but they're also core to the way that those businesses run. And so just saying that you're going to go in there and replace them isn't really an option. And so how do you unify data and capabilities across multiple systems that could be one, you know, they may have modern interfaces, but they also may not have any modern way to kind of connect to those tools. And finally, that kind of dovetails into this last quadrant here about, legacy system integration. And we see this, in pretty much all of the domains that we deal in the public sector, which is, there just frankly are a lot of systems that governments operate that there is no commercial alternative for, and therefore they're maintaining systems that just are old. And how do we get new capabilities delivered from those solutions? So there's a number of things that we also deal with as far as, how do we find solutions to those particular problems? One is obviously there's competing priorities across a number of business lines. Those of you who are actually, IT folks know that, everybody's priority is always priority number one. And that just isn't realistic in the concept of, that we have budgets and we have dependencies on multiple IT initiatives to get, some of these larger systems done that we like. We actually have a military customer, defense customer, and they want to change something to a core DoD system, and it might be their priority, but it's not necessarily the priority of the owner of that core system. And so, how do we work around those types of things? And frankly, on the right side here, we talk about things like managing change and delivering things at speed. I think for a lot of our public sector customers, the expectation that capability can be delivered to both internal customers and external constituents is something that only happens at a snail's pace, and that's just not true anymore. It certainly doesn't have to be true anymore. So what are we about? And I'm being very cognizant not to make this a marketing commercial for our product, but to give you an example of, in this marketplace, what are enterprise low-code tools trying to accomplish? Well, so one of those things, and you can read, there's a Forrester study out that says that low-code allows us to deliver applications up to 20 times faster than traditional, waterfall coding methods. And frankly, we have a broad enough customer base here at Appian that, we still see customers asking us for waterfall projects. And it really doesn't have to be that way, because that really is just a way that we see slows down the process of getting functionality into the field. And so what we're advocating, and frankly most of our peers in this business are advocating, is a much more iterative approach to building what we would consider mission systems, so these what we call significant new apps. The other thing that you will see in this space, and we've paid particular attention to it just because I think there is an appetite for it for our public sector customers, is the idea of using low-code tools to enhance or connect legacy system investments. And we see this all over the place in organizations, especially public sector organizations, that have significant ERP investments. So, we're not going into our public sector customers and saying, hey, you need to replace SAP or Oracle Financials and use Appian to do that. We're not a core HR system or a core financials product. However, what we are finding is when we do look at the build versus buy comparisons of how much it would cost to modify or customize that ERP system versus perhaps using a tool like Appian, a low-code product like Appian on top of that, you typically will find that it is far less expensive to configure a low-code platform on top of an ERP system than to modify, or customize an ERP tool. Everybody on this call, I'm sure, has seen, examples of where, and again, I'm talking just from experience being on the integrator side, but seeing our government customers go out, they purchase an ERP system, and then we customize it to do something it was never meant to do. And so then what are we doing? We're becoming basically our own software company, whereby, it's no longer SAP, it's now, your agency name / SAP. And we're seeing more and more agencies have wisened up to the fact that, yes, those tools still have a place in their organizations, but in a much more vanilla manner. And so we're offering strategies for how to use low code alongside, major ERP systems to let them remain vanilla, but also provide the configurability and the customization that they require to meet their business challenges. So, as a strategy that we've seen work, when we take this, when we take this approach to these types of customers, this coexistence between legacy infrastructure and low code is not mutually exclusive. So there's a couple areas where you will see more and more low code vendors tending to fall into a couple of buckets. And so there's two slides here. I'll talk about what those buckets are, and then one I'll kind of give my version of a definition of what I believe low code really means. The first is, all low code vendors are playing in a space that typically looks and smells like case management. And the reason is specifically for our public sector customers, many of our public sector customer challenges can be distilled into some form of case management. And that could be permitting, it could be licensing, it could be benefits processing. But typically, we can distill most agency or public sector challenges into something that looks or smells something like case management. And again, I'm using that term fairly broadly. You see in these kind of lime green buckets where those things might sit. But again, I think what you will see is for applications that tend to fall into those types of buckets, low code tools typically can be a pretty compelling solution versus what used to be products that were selling case management out of the box. And these were things like Oracle Siebel, like Siebel, and there were a couple of big framework vendors that were doing pure case management frameworks. I think what you will find is that low code provides much more flexibility, but still accomplishes the same basic goals as those tools would. My definition of low code, and frankly, all low code vendors have a different definition of what this means. I distill it, at least in our product, to something fairly core. There is the ability to do some code, but you don't have to. And so if you were to navigate through our product, and I'll show you a screenshot a little bit later, you would find that in our interface designer, there is an area where, I might be able to script something that says for a given field, required equals true, or I can just check a checkbox that makes the field required. And so I think you're seeing a lot of different definitions of what low code means. But in reality, what it is just, it's more, in my opinion, what it should be is that code should be optional, not required. And I think what you will also see, especially for IT teams, and we see this all the time, people that are coming from a coding background like to have the option. And so we're still providing that option should they feel more comfortable in a coding environment. The final place that I think you will see across, enterprise low code, and I will define the word enterprise a little bit later in the presentation, but the final area I think you see a lot of vendors in low code providing functionality is in the area of process management. And that comes in a lot of different flavors. So, specifically, when we distill it down another level, there's, to me, a difference between workflow and business process management. Workflow is simply the routing of things from status to status. And so a lot of tools will just, a lot of products will just, make that happen by you going in, and when you want to change it to a different status, you got to drop down and you change that drop down to something else. That's very different from having an orchestration engine moving tasks along a continuum of time. And so, one of the things that we, guide our customers in looking at when they're thinking about whether, low code vendor A or low code vendor B is really the right tool for them is to look at the level of complexity of what they're trying to do. And you will see a lot of vendors, particularly in the document management space, who have rolled out case management products. A lot of what they're doing is really the former version of workflow, which is literally, I have this document or this folder, and I'm just saying that the folder is at stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3, which is different than truly orchestrating a business process. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to turn the presentation over to June, And then after June is done, I will pick back up with some other considerations in this space. So June, if you're able to take over, you're welcome to dive right in.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, perfect. That was my one scare here. Okay, great. So thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to join all of you to share some of the great results we've been experiencing at the Vermont Agency of Transportation with our BPM implementation. When I first came, let me see if I can move. The next slide, I can't seem to move to the next slide. There we go. Okay, great. Just takes a while. Awesome. Okay, when I first came to AOT and decided to pilot BPM as a solution to help our organization get to a better place, like most transformations, the very first step needed was to secure critical stakeholder buy-in. Buy-in that would also be needed to resonate throughout the rest of the entire, the entire organization. It had to make sense to them or it would never be sustained. So we needed a motivating vision, which, it can be a foggy and abstract exercise. And so we devised this map, which labeled attributes describing AOT in 2008 when we began this. And in column 2, those were the attributes. And then we contrasted each attribute to an improved future state that all of us could relate and buy into. It recognized that we had a lot of systemic issues that we wanted to solve strategically, we wanted to get away from. And I can't overstate how important this was, and it still is, in keeping the effort moving forward. Because transformations are slow, they're not projects, they're ongoing, efforts. So considering one of our, and this was especially important to us, considering one of our major challenges is that our leadership are comprised of political appointees who often have short terms, and senior management serves at that appointee's pleasure. So it's likely they might also come and go. So that critical sponsorship does come and go in a few short years, and it can leave a BPM program vulnerable when our objective is to have it live well beyond that initial trajectory of the transformation that we put it on. Slides are slow in changing here, so I'm trying to get to the second slide. Oh, there we go. Okay.
June, June, going forward, just ask me and I'll change the slides for you. Thanks.
Okay, that's great. Perfect. So again, the primary goal for BPM at AOT was to transform AOT into a better performing, continually improving organization. And all of these initial objectives still help guide us toward the fulfillment of that goal. Next slide. All of our present work focuses on AOT's mission-critical core process. This is the project delivery engine that consumes greater than $300 million in capital investment yearly to deliver transportation assets like paving, bridges, roadway, park and rides. And you see that this is the beginning where all the programs, projects go into this like hopper. So to give you a high level appreciation of this core process, it begins with this project selection where candidate projects across all of our civil engineering programs are chosen, and then they're federally programmed with federal funds at an 80-20 match, 80% federal and then 20% state match. They're all formally scoped, and then the backbone is this design plan. We start with conceptual plans, then on to preliminary and final plans. These dotted semicircles represent a vortex of critical path permitting processes, which are environmental, hydrology, right-of-way, and utility relocation. These are notorious bottlenecks. Once they make it through this, they're advertised for construction, and they're finally built by construction contractors. And then the little green piece at the very end is the finals, where all the contract and all the paperwork is reconciled, and that's called the finals project. And that was our low-risk pilot project that we started with in 2012. And I'm going to drill down to that project in the next slides a bit more. But before we get there, I also wanted to say that our second project was the finals project. And that represents this green, dotted semicircle. And this was the biggest bottleneck of all. And then the yellow represents the utility relocation process, which is what we plan to do next. So here's a big core process that we're tackling like one major sub-process at a time. Jason, next slide. So here's a high-level workflow of that finals process that was at the very end of the core process that I just put up. So this has been in place since 2015, and what we did is we streamlined 121 activities to 20 tasks, and we did that in a 3-step process. So we have about 14 people, 14 swim lanes, but the first pink step consists of 4 to 5 tasks across 2 swim lanes. It begins with when the construction project ends and the project engineer comes in from the field and drops off this banker's box filled with all the construction paperwork. I mean, paper, change orders, plan changes, invoices, time cards, everything, paper. And basically, it's an analysis and reconciliation of that box of paperwork to answer just the question as to whether we, AOT, or the contract owe each other any money after the project is done. Once that's determined, step 2 is all in here, and that involves 4 to 10 tasks related to the contractor and the federal highway approving and signing off on that reconciliation. Before BPM, these approvals were accomplished using the United States Postal Service, and now it's totally done through the system. So step 3 is this step over here, and that represents the 6 tasks regarding the internal AOT distributions and routing for approvals and sign-off. To date, we've closed out about 400 contracts, and we've decreased the entire cycle time on average from 20 to 4 months, giving us about 65+% efficiency. Another benefit we harvested because of the transparency on this process, which was kind of a surprise, was an ability to identify about $12 million of unobligated float sooner that was previously unavailable until after the contract was finalized. So we were able to get that right in the middle as soon as those overages, the amount of money we didn't spend on these projects could become available. And the impact on that would be that these unobligated funds, well, the obligated float turned into unobligated funds that we can apply to new projects about a year sooner than was possible without BPM. So before BPM, we had to wait until the very end of the cycle for that to become available. And, we're talking 16 months. That's considerable. The biggest surprise was this dramatic improvement in the variability between the happy and the more arduous unhappy path. So basically down here, we have the blue and the gold represent all the unhappy path because it required extra approvals from FHWA. And the baseline was 670, now it's down to 198. Well, that's great. We got a lot of more efficiency on that. But when we compare that to the happy path, which did not include those gold, those extra tasks in gold, it was only the blue ones, we went from 523 to 182. But honestly, the difference between these two was 147. Now we're down to 16 days different. So, I mean, when we talk about standardization of processes, this was remarkable. I mean, this you can't even really call it an unhappy path anymore. It's just basically within the, within averages to be, one standardized process. That was a big one. And And by the way, we've got nothing but great feedback from our federal partners, from FHWA, which is Federal Highway, and our construction contractors for their, seamless participation in the new processes. Next slide, Jason. Okay, this is a high-level view of the right-of-way permitting process. We have implemented 2 of the 3 phases, and we expect to finish this year. We've gotten to about here and implemented, and the rest of this is about 90% done. And for now, I can share, and preliminary measures indicate we're getting about 50% efficiency right out of the box. So we are doing better than we originally estimated. For now, I can share the following. The scope of the specialty sub-processes, survey, we go out to the field, we plot the existing right-of-way. The right-of-way, by the way, is land that we do own, and if our designs go outside of the right-of-way, like a bridge, Fed Highway has new, specs, and we have to do a bigger bridge, that means we have to purchase more property. And basically, you all may be familiar with that, but this is basically the process by which we acquire property. Okay, so let's see, we got, the scope currently does not include the condemnation or the relocation, but here's like in the future, we can extend later on when these represent only about 4% of our cases, so we wanted to really kind of do the big stuff first. And the reason why we didn't do it is because it involves the courts, and we probably would have to be integrated with them to some extent. Prior to BPM, the right-of-way was an entirely manual, paper-laden process. There was no applications or systems supporting it or the staff. All you see is piles and piles of paper and scrolls, plans all over desks everywhere. Right-of-way is comprised of hundreds of complex sub-processes and tedious work on the critical path. So maximizing efficiency is paramount for our project scheduling, especially important in our northern state where the building season is short and pressure to stay on schedule is intense. In a normal year, we construct about 75 to 100 projects, and in years with storm disasters like Irene and Sandy, it can be closer to 150. This process is about 5 times larger than the other process that I talked about, the finals reconciliation. And it employs about 25 staff members and serves about 45 project managers and technicians. These, okay, the next slide. These next slide speak to the value proposition, the cost benefit, and the return on investment of BPM at AOT. For any project over $1 million, our Vermont State IT agency requires an independent review to be performed by an independent third-party consultant. For us, this occurred after the finals project, because the finals project was much less than $1 million, and before the right-of-way. We had to do it in order to get the right-of-way approved, and that was going to bring us over $1 million. So we had to get this done. Cost about $20,000, outside consultants did it. Half of the numbers that were used were based on actual performance and, costs from the finals process, and half were estimates for the right-of-way that were based on the actuals. They were extrapolated. I'd like to emphasize that any of these numbers on these slides, they're not my formulations or my calculations. I only provided the raw data to the consultant. They crunched the numbers and created the report. This slide was lifted right out of the independent review report. And just remember, keep in mind that we have an 80-20 split. So the feds usually pay about 80% of our projects. And then we match it, the state, with 20% of it. And so we calculated the investments, because I did get this funded with federal money. And we calculated the investments separately, so that separately and combined, on the next slide, combined, so that each funding entity can understand how effective their contribution was separately and then overall. This represents the lifetime, this slide represents the lifetime and 20-year net efficiency gains right here. So basically, and I have a slide that explains a little bit more detail on how we calculated, or how they calculated the efficiencies. But for the finals project, this is what they calculated over a 20-year period. This is what they calculated on the right-of-way, the core mission critical process. When you subtract the cost of that project is what you get for the 20-year gain. Over the lifetime, the return on investment for the pilots project, which was a pilot, it was a small, low risk, low, sort of a low value project. But even on that, we got 0.5. And then on the right-of-way, much higher. When we looked at the state, right, just that 20% that the state, and the states are always having a hard time coming up with money, right, to match. I mean, I had to compete against someone that was saying, on $1 million, I could spend $200,000 on culverts, right? So it's like, you're still competing, even with great ROIs in a business case like this. There's always someone that wants to use that money somewhere, somewhere else. So we got a state ROI of 6.6, which is really quite amazing. I mean, 63 is through the roof. And basically what that is that the investment gain for every $1 that the state put in, over 20 years, they're going to get back $6.6. And then on the right-of-way, it would be 63. That's pretty amazing. And some may say too good to be true, but honestly, if you knew how incredibly inefficient our 70-year-old processes were, you might think differently. Maybe you have a few of your own, but this was really kind of mind-blowing for us. Jason, next slide. So this slide presents information for both of the projects combined, from combined funding sources. The gains minus the cost, resulting in a 9 ROI across both the processes combined, and a whooping 50, if only considering the state funds, right? Just a postscript on the accuracy of this report. While we did underestimate the efficiency gains, and I'll explain that a little bit, we were trying to be really conservative. We also did for the project's cost. Our costs were actually $200K more than originally anticipated, because we increased scope. We increased the survey piece, which we didn't initially decide to do. So, but honestly, it's almost moot considering how enormous the gains are. And keep in mind, the legislature knows we're not going to give them a check for all the efficiency gains and cost savings. Instead, these are operational efficiencies. We expect the money that we save on these costs will free up state money, and they will go to more projects. We'll have more match for those federal projects, because we're not wasting so much money on such a poor, operational infrastructure. And then again, that leads to more capital investment in transportation assets. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. That's good. This is good. Okay, so this slide presents some of the info to better understand some of the efficiency calculations. First, all efficiency gains were just simple calculations against base salaries of the primary full-time employees of those two processes. Finals, that smaller process only had 2 full-time employees, and right-of-way has 25. Being conservative, the consultants didn't include much smaller efficiency gains that we could have calculated for about 80 other users, because they weren't the primary FTEs to those two processes. But we constantly get, like from the contractors, they're like saying that our life is so much better because you have organized our relationship with you, and it's so much more efficient for them. So we didn't even calculate that. What we did is we took the 2 employees, we combined their salaries, so that's $150 for them, $150K and $1.8 million. We did not include these folks, the 25 project managers and all these other folks. And we applied a $36 an hour for a labor rate times 40 hours a week times 50 weeks a year. And basically, that's how we got these numbers. And then we just put them down here. And then these are the gains, these are efficiency gains that were estimated. Because we were already live with the CCF. At that time, we were getting 25%. So again, conservatively, the consultant just applied that across the board for 20. He's applying that across the board because this is what we would have saved for a 20-year period every single year for 20 years. And it comes to about this, $32,000. For the right-of-way base, for the right-of-way, we actually, let me just go back here for a second. Even though it was 25%, we actually are now getting close to 65% as what I showed you in a previous gain. So we underestimated all the gains from about the third year, fourth year out to 20 years because we're at 65%. So again, we underestimated that. For the right-of-way, we have an incrementally, this increments up 25, 35, 45, 50, and basically what we come up to is about about $15 million over the course of those years. For us, it did take a full year or two post-implementation to realize that the new baseline of performance, because of all the simultaneous transitions going on. Some people don't want to use it. Some people take longer to come on. There is a year or two transition. And I need to emphasize again that at every point where there was a choice, I asked the consultant to err on the side of being conservative for the report's efficiency gains. I did this knowing that the processes were so old and inefficient that any automation was going to make a huge difference, and we didn't want to gild the lily. Next slide. So here's a graphical, just a peek. This was also graphed in the report of the cumulative overall cost represented by the blue lined label. Finals was done, right away started, here it was done, and then these are all operational costs over the 20-year period. And then the red line depicts cumulative efficiency gains for both of the projects. And of course, here's break even and they go up. Next slide. Okay, I created this last slide to compare AOT's BPMS project to other state of Vermont non-BPMS IT projects because I wanted to compare the business value, not just IT value. To do this, I lifted information directly from other IR reports for projects over $1 million on our state EPMO website, where they live, and selected the projects with the best benefits profile for comparison. And my takeaway is that even though BPM is not a silver bullet, I will always flip to BPM before a traditional non-BPM solution. As you can note, when comparing ours to others, there's a substantial case for considering, BPM instead of going the traditional route. I'm not trying to make the case that these other projects weren't valuable or justified, but only that a BPMS may be a better strategic solution. For example, you can see that no other IT project could turn an ROI. And the consultant who did my project also did 3 others that are in here as well. So they use the same template. Any of the other 2 top projects with lower operational costs, these guys, couldn't hold those savings enough to get a break even in less than 25 years. I mean, these are extraordinary. So, you're spending lots of money there too. The only project that came close was our Human Services Registry. And it's a one-time, this represents a one-time cost and break even in 4.5 years. So that actually was the most positive of the project. And all the rest are basically going to be maintained as cost centers. So in our case at AOT, if BPMS continues to retire old manual paper-laden processes, I predict it will not only deliver more breakthrough process performance, but will inevitably bend the cost curve on our IT portfolio investment as we use the platform to sunset older applications and their O&M costs. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks, June. For the folks in the audience, when we were prepping for this webinar, I think, frankly, the most eye-opening part of this was the fact that June works for a state agency that actually tracks ROI calculations and performs this level of rigor. I mean, most of our customers do not go into this level of depth to calculate the return on investment on IT projects in any way, shape, or form that's at this level of depth. And so when we decided to focus on this, I think a lot of it was around the fact that, sure, Appian can come out and we can market gains to our customers and things like that. And certainly we don't take credit for this $17 million number. They're applying a technology family that just happens to be very good at achieving these types of gains. And so, in the last couple of minutes here, I just want to go through a couple of concepts for when you are looking at low code and BPM. What does that really mean? What is the approach and why does it matter? So there's a couple of things you're going to hear, and frankly, the marketing term of the last couple of months has been intelligent automation. What this really is just the philosophy towards how do we bring in what I would consider, now leading or bleeding edge technologies into our environment. And so there's a number of different philosophies for doing this. There are some vendors that build their own AI tools or buy RPA companies to bring them into their environment. Our philosophy has been a little bit more open than that, where we have made it easy to connect to the product of your choice in these areas. But essentially what you're looking for here is how flexible is the tool that you're buying or using at delivering the ability to connect to these leading edge types of tools. So to me, the thing to look out here is truly the flexibility that you have and choice across both current projects and current types of tools, and perhaps this slide next year will show blockchain or something like that. The other thing that we see that's pervasive across low code is the idea of building applications from reusable components. The thing that I will caution those of you on the call here is you don't want to be completely locked into using all of the components from a given vendor. So yes, this is our list of some high-level objects that we provide to our customers, but our philosophy is not that you have to use all of these or else your application is not as good as somebody who does. Most of our customers don't use our content management system. Most of them use some document management solution that they've got at their organization or their agency. We see that everybody's got SharePoint, everybody's got Documentum, and so we see a lot of integrations where frankly our content management system just isn't used, and that's fine. We have customers that use rules engines. We've got customers that use different reporting environments. And so, you want a tool that allows you to, if you have nothing else, to build something, but also that gives you the flexibility to play nice with the investments that you already have. The other thing that you want to be able to look for is the idea of being able to aggregate data from multiple sources into what we would consider data views, or we call them Appian records. But the idea here is that conceptually, one of the things that we've done in our product is make it such that we don't have to own all of the data in the Appian product in order to use it to perform process transactions. And I think the key there is, a lot of COTS products require you to do big data migrations into these tools, and that can be fraught with difficulty. Frankly, the biggest thing that we see for customers trying to build new applications with lots of data sources is getting all of the data source owners to agree on what the data model looks like. So we kind of eschew that and say, look, we'll build a view of whatever that piece of data is and pull that data from whatever the source is in whatever manner they require, but allow you to take action on it and put it back where it came from. We don't have to pull everything into, in our case, an Appian data store. I'll kind of go through this. This is just an example of how that might look in a case management application. But what you're seeing here is data that could come from a number of different sources, but we've kind of mashed all of this together into a single user interface. So we're doing things with AI, we're doing things with documents, we're doing things with actions, and also pulling things from external data into our environment. The other thing I will tell you, and this is just because I've been doing BPM since probably about 2004, really frankly, when Microsoft InfoPath came out was when this kind of started. But find something that is standards-based. And I'm telling you that just because if you're requiring your business users to learn a proprietary method for process modeling in order to build into an application, you're going to break down that collaboration between the business and IT. And we've taken the approach using BPMN to keep things very simple. If I was to come there as your management consultant to one of your organizations, we'd either be drawing this in Visio to look like this, or we'd be drawing it on a whiteboard that looks like this. And so we've taken the approach to keep it very simple. There are some novel proprietary approaches to doing this, but again, it just requires that everybody has to learn something new. The same thing goes from when you're doing an evaluation of tools. Make sure that people who are not technical can actually contribute to the design and building of applications. We rolled out this feature in mid-2017 called Appian Decision. We basically took our expression rules language, which looks like Excel, but can get kind of cumbersome when you're doing very complex decisions, and we built a decision table. But the key here is that you'll notice on the right side, I have the ability to test this business rule. I can place a business analyst with a standard operating procedure and tell that person to go in, design that logic, and test it. And then that object is available to other people designing the application where that business analyst doesn't have to touch other stuff. But we've tried to make it very, very simple here. And again, I would be looking for things where designing business logic is accessible to users who are not technical. That's just something where I think you will also get buy-in from the business part of your organizations, where they have some control, don't require contractors to do all this work. And so I think this has been something that's really been caught on with our public sector customers. The other thing we talk about low code is typally in the UI. All of these products in this, all of the people that we compete with typically in this area have the ability to do UI design in a drag and drop manner. Just realize that there's a level of power when you're using a tool that is backed by process and rules, meaning that the types of validations and business processes we can trigger from building these types of forms. There's one family of low-code tools that is basically just CRUD. So I'm able to read and update and create data records. So it's basically a one-to-one relationship with a data record. That's different than designing forms that are, as we would typically quote it, TurboTax type forms where we can provide some real business logic into the form to make them smarter for the people that are using them. So look at that when you're thinking through maybe a low-code investment. One of the other things that we're seeing more and more of is our customers are asking us to be able to integrate investments they've made in other tools into the platform itself. This is just an example of a full integration of Tableau directly into an Appian UI. But the idea here is that how do we reduce the amount of tools that a given worker has to use to complete their job? And consolidating a lot of that into a single user interface can really improve the efficiency of many business processes. We could talk for quite a while about mobile applications. We see this in a lot of our customers that are doing inspections, where they're having to go out in the field and perhaps inspect in areas that don't have connectivity or limited connectivity. We have made in our current release some significant upgrades to our offline mobile capability, where they are truly disconnected from cellular service or Wi-Fi. But the idea here is, how do you make it simple to deliver that mobile experience without requiring you to build a separate mobile app? And that's what you should be looking for. How easy is it to mobile enable the solutions that I'm building? Finally, with just a handful of slides left, think through how flexible. When we talk about enterprise low code, we're talking about how does that platform fit inside of the investments that I already have. And so one of the things that you will see, particularly in our product going forward, is this idea of connecting, large enterprise COTS products and using Appian as an ecosystem for delivering that capability in a single UI or in a single experience. So this is actually something that's new. This is actually an integration that we're rolling out directly with Power BI through Microsoft, but this is just a native example of that product being directly integrated into the Appian UI. Again, another one for state agencies and for state and local authorities. We've actually integrated DocuSign directly into an Appian solution. So folks are coming in and need to do some kind of self-service application. The ability to have two-way communication between a tool like DocuSign that allows end users to complete forms and things like that in a way that your organization will accept. We've chosen, instead of building it ourselves, why not just integrate with what typically is considered the gold standard for doing something like this. Finally, on the integration side, the other thing that we're seeing more and more of is this idea of what I consider bi-directional communication between Appian and third-party applications. So, with Tableau that we showed you a couple slides ago, that's basically, for lack of a better term, for those of us who've been around for a while, an iframe. We call it a web content channel. This is actually where we're using a third-party application, and when they're clicking on this map in Google, we're actually importing that data. It's actually changing something in the Appian interface. We recently did a demonstration to a Department of Defense agency where we integrated Esri mapping, so really complex geospatial data, and we were able to integrate that directly into Appian business processes so that they didn't have to use multiple tools and cut and paste stuff between those tools. I talked briefly about integrations. The idea here is, philosophically, your organization needs to decide whether you want the flexibility to be able to choose how you integrate with AI tools, or you want a product that just gives you the one that they've built. Coming from an integrator background, as an integrator, we always want to be able to pick, in my case, best of breed for our customers. I think our philosophy towards this is novel in a way relative to our competitors who are trying to make you use their version of AI to integrate into the applications. And in kind of a last on the feature side, when we talk about what is enterprise low code, we have a cloud offering. We have a cloud offering in Amazon GovCloud that can be used by our public sector customers. We offer the ability to run on premises, in the cloud, or in a hybrid model. There's no difference in the way that the applications function. And, just the idea that our customers are running mission system applications on our product is different than, some products that are really only suited for, what I would consider back office transactions. And so I will end kind of on this slide. This is just an example of some of our mission system customers, specifically in the federal government, but just kind of gives you a set of the breadth of types of customers that we service on the mission side. Typically, they fall into a number of different buckets. So with that, I think last marketing slide, I promise. I've put our email addresses up here. June has been gracious enough that if folks on the call have questions about, perhaps how they did their ROI calculations or her project, she was willing to field some emails. My information is here as well. I'm more than happy to discuss anything that you've heard today.